I mean, I think even their 10th grade coach used to play minor league ball for the Tigers.
All right, we're going to call tonight's meeting to order. Joan, roll call, please.
Director Hucker.
Here.
Director President.
Here.
Director Lauer.
Here.
Director Petrie.
Here.
Director Cornetti.
Here.
Director Freeland.
Here.
Here. Great. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Move on to approving tonight's agenda. I'll go ahead and make the motion if I can get a second, please.
Second.
Great. Director Thielander with the second. All those in favor of approving tonight's agenda, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda passes. Tonight, we have our consent agenda up on the screen. If I could get a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda.
I'll move to approve.
Great. Director Hocker with the
Second.
motion and Director Petrie with the second. All those in favor of approving tonight's consent agenda, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Our first item tonight is an overview on building assets and reducing risks, otherwise known as BAR. And we have some board members who may not be as familiar with the program as maybe some board members who have been here for a few years, but I think everyone could stand an update and a refresh and plans forward. So I'll turn it over to
Don.
you or to Don. Okay, to Don. Welcome.
And Rob.
Oh, and Rob.
Stephen Gordy was also going to be present, and he has some family things going on, so he's going to.
Apparently he thinks the birth of his granddaughter.
I know, I
is
didn't
his
want
priority
to, I
over
didn't
this.
want to announce that, so you did it. I did not.
Good reason, good reason.
Yes, it is a good reason. Okay. So again, we're just going to give you a brief overview. So what is BAR? It is a strength-based model that provides school with that comprehensive approach, and it helps us to meet the academic needs of our students, the social emotional needs of all of our students, and the goal is all. Okay.
I'll talk a little bit about how BAR came to be in this district, and really this coincided with our grade reconfiguration that took place back in 2017. So prior to that, Stillwater Area High School was a 10 through 12 building, and that was when we did the grade reconfiguration. That was a time when we shifted to middle schools and took our 6th graders out of elementary, put them into middle schools, went 6 through 8, and then 9th graders came up to the high school to make us the comprehensive school that we are now. And we had a lot of conversation around the idea that there's a ton of research that talks about 9th grade being the hook, right? If you can get kids to be successful in 9th grade, the statistics are off the charts that they'll continue to stay successful with you. Or if you lose them in 9th grade, the statistics are pretty dire in terms of where they're going to be by the time they're hitting grade 11 and 12. So we wanted to be really, really intentional about knowing what we needed to do differently with 9th grade to make sure that, that we were getting them. And so we formed a team at that time, basically it was a transition team, and started having a lot of conversation around what kinds of practices do we need to employ, and again, what do we need to do differently with 9th grade. And as we had conversation and settled on the things that we wanted to do, the practices that we wanted to employ, lo and behold, Matt Kraft, one of our assistant principals, sat down with me and we talked and we looked at the BAR program, and like I said, lo and behold, there were so many things that kind of mirrored each other. And I won't say hesitant, but I'm not a huge believer in just grabbing a program and bringing a program in and saying, here, this is the fix-it. But again, we had so much conversation around what we wanted to do, and we looked at just the amount of overlap that we brought the program in, talked about the program with our transition team, and we decided, yeah, this is something that we wanted to try. And so we brought that in 2017 and 2018, which is the first year that 9th graders were in. We started it as a 9th grade only program. As Director Lewick said, it really is a social emotional program at its core. It's designed to identify student strengths and build on relationships all across the board, student to student, teacher to student, teacher to teacher, and then use those relationships, to leverage those relationships, to understand what we know about the student's strengths, to leverage academic success so that it manifests itself in academic success. We had so much success with it over the first 2 years that we ran it that we decided to try to pilot it in 10th grade in 2019, 2020. So we had one small cohort in grade 10, and the following year then we went all across the board in grade 10. And that really is a big undertaking because that requires a ton of work on the part of our scheduler, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But there's a ton of really intentional things that you have to do as you build the master schedule where all these classes kind of fit into place for high school students. But we've made that commitment. Around that same time, we started having conversations across the district, and other schools were interested in looking at that. Lake Elmo Elementary actually hopped on kind of as a pilot at elementary, and it's kind of grown into other buildings throughout the district since then.
Oops, I think we missed one.
Got a
I don't know
quick
what's
trigger finger
happening.
there.
I know. This is why I hate having this responsibility. There.
The two main pillars of BAR that serve as the foundation of what the program is all about are relationships and data. As I talked about, we talk about relationships on 3 different tiers. We talk about student-to-student relationships, teacher-to-teacher relationships, and then teacher-to-student relationships. And I'll talk a little bit more about kind of maybe what that looks like in a little bit. The other foundational piece really is data. And I'll talk about that a little bit more too. You know, prior to BAR, it's not that schools who don't have this program, it's not that they don't have conversations, because clearly they do around student success and the strengths that students bring. But a lot of times, without the focus of a program like BAR, it turns into water cooler talk. And as opposed to water cooler talk, we want data. We want information that tells us, what does this tell us about, you know, at a macro level, what our students are doing, or at a micro level, what's going on with this particular student? How do we get this student connected to resources? And we do that by recording all kinds of data and tracking the heck out of it. We have spreadsheets that we'll show you here in a little bit that you can imagine just get multiplied as the year goes on. This diagram gives you a little bit of a visual example of how the program works, both potentially at secondary and at elementary. For those of you that are familiar, the diagram there, the triangle actually might look very, very similar to what you think of with either an MTSS model or many times an RTI model or a PBIS model. A lot of these things are patterned similarly, and our BAR program has functioned in a similar kind of way too. We basically have 3 tiers of meetings that our staff are required to participate in, and that they come in, they give up their prep time to come in, and those meetings really are centered around students. So one analogy that I give is, you probably are all familiar with PLCs at this point in time. So at Stillwater High School, we have maybe 4 or 5 US history teachers. Good schools figured out a long time ago, hey, it'd be a really good idea if all of those US history teachers got together to talk about US history and talk about their curriculum and talk about their assessments and those kinds of things, so that they function more as a team rather than independent contractors. Hey, great idea. Not only do we do that at Stillwater High School, but we have meetings deliberately and intentionally set aside for our teachers to talk about students that they have in common. So again, as teachers begin to identify what are the strengths of these students, let's share that information out so that other teachers are in position to use the same kinds of methods that some teachers have found to be successful with those students. And we start out with what's called a team meeting. I'll explain how the teams are organized here in a little bit, but a team meeting is a smaller group of teachers that's probably about 4 to 5 to 6 teachers, depending on the size of the team. But those teachers have common students. They get together to talk about Robbie Bach and what they're seeing with Robbie Bach in class. What are Rob's strengths? What has Rob not done particularly well at, or what does Rob not respond well to, and how can we, again, share that information to make sure that everybody's in a position to play to Rob's strengths once we know them. If the science teacher hasn't been able to figure out what my strengths are, the social studies teacher can share that, and that becomes the basis of a team level meeting. We also have meetings where all of the teams, because right now we'll have we have 5 teams in grade 9 and 5 teams in grade 10. So we'll run another layer of meeting, that's the tier 2 meeting, where all 5 of those teams get together and talk about BAR concepts on a macro level at Stillwater Area High School and some of the students that they are either struggling with or, hey, I've tried a couple of these interventions, that's not working. Can I tap into a larger group to share some intervention strategies that may be helpful? And the tier 3 piece really is kind of like our highest level where we say, you know what, we've tried some things at tier 1, we've tried some things at tier 2, we're still not being successful. Now, what kinds of community connections do we need to make in the community? Is there a social services referral that would be appropriate because the issues that we're seeing and that we know are being presented to the student are so great that might be even outside the scope of school. So how do we get students connected with those pieces outside of school? So all 3 of those meetings take place kind of in concert. They build off of each other. We don't just jump right to a level 3. We go through the process starting at the foundation at level 1, which is get into the classroom. Classroom teachers, we need to know our kids. We're going to be trying things left and right with kids to see what works, what gets them to be successful before we bump them up.
At the elementary, it's very similar, but I think the I time and U times, the lessons that are provided by BAR really align with our responsive classroom, our behavior management system, and that pairs very well. And also, we have second step curriculum that we've taken. Gina Doe especially has really aligned those pieces together so that you're strengthening the tier 1 and that social emotional piece. And then I think also it's changed the conversation that people are not just talking about the problem and taking up 10 minutes of time to just talk about all the things wrong with the student. It is talking about the strengths. You have a very focused time and you come up with solutions. And it really has flipped the script. So that's a piece of that as well. Okay. There.
As far as outcomes, the research is pretty clear for schools that run the BAR program that there is a link to standardized tests. There's a link to nationally normed tests like ACT. We've had some historical, philosophical issues sometimes with getting MCA off the ground and getting our community to understand the importance and all the kids to sit for that. But again, the research is pretty clear that there's a strong link between those. The other piece that we track very, very carefully at the high school is how does this manifest itself in terms of credits? This responds directly to our graduation rate, and our graduation rate has been very, very high, I believe in large part because of the amount of attention that we pay to credits. And what do we do when a student happens to be failing or is in danger of failing a course? Anytime you fail a course, you run the risk of being credit deficient. Credit deficient manifests itself in graduation rates, and so we try to get on top of that right away. We have we kind of refer to it as rule number 1 at Stillwater Area High School, and our staff has adopted this kind of as their mantra, which is rule number 1 is go for every student. So above all else, we understand that's our charge and that's our mission. And again, when we're graduating 96% of our students in 4 years, and even more than that by the time you take even one summer of remediation for credit recovery into effect, we're up around 98%, which puts us up tops just about anywhere.
At the elementary, I think we have seen in the 2 elementary schools, Lake Afton, or Lake Elmo and Afton, Lakeland, that we have seen increases in our MCA scores in those 2 buildings where we've had a little bit of flatline or decrease. And we've also seen decrease in behavior issues too. And I'll show that more in depth. Is that?
No, you want to go back one?
Yeah. Why is that going that way?
The other way.
Yeah.
Just do it, Joan.
That was right.
There it is. Yep.
Yeah.
So the elements of BAR, the three visuals that you see kind of on the right, the small block, the big block, and the community connect, those kind of mirror the triangle visual that you saw earlier. So those are the three foundations of the communication patterns and loops that exist, at least within our building. The other piece, one of the other components of BAR is this idea of I time and or U time at elementary. I time basically is social emotional curriculum. And so what happens is probably, let's call it about once a month, our teachers in 3 core area classes, either English or social studies or science, probably about once a month, our teachers will be teaching a lesson that's not grounded in Minnesota state standards, but is actually grounded in social emotional learning. So there will be a lesson on study skills, or there will be a lesson on organization, or a lesson maybe on collaboration, or maybe it's an activity actually that requires them to collaborate. But because it's curriculum, there's some intentional discussion that takes place then too, where the teacher can make a teachable moment out of this to say, okay, the purpose of today was about collaboration. Let's talk about what this means in class. You are going to be asked to work in a group project at some point in time, either in this class or throughout your high school career. We all know what that's like when certain people either don't pull their weight or one person does all of the work in the group and things like that. And is that fair? And how do we all contribute to that? It provides the springboard and the platform for things like that that lead to the learning experiences that we have later. One other one, just a specific example, one of the first I times that students engage in is something called rare birds. Students are asked to write down like one quality about themselves or maybe one characteristic that not a lot of other people would necessarily know. So I might write down, I'm Rob Bach, and one thing that no one else knows about me is I can rattle off the winners of all 58 Super Bowls and tell you like who the MVP was and the score and things like that. And true story, by the way. And the point of it is that at some point during the year, teachers every now and then will kind of throw that out and say, okay, you know what? Here's a person who is this, and this. Does anyone know who this person might be? And it's a way of kind of creating. It's like an icebreaker, right? But it's a tangible way of creating community within that classroom that serves to start strengthening relationships among students. If I'm a teacher and I'm gone one day and I have a substitute, that might be a decent lesson plan for the substitute to come in. It doesn't have to be that whole entire lesson, but it's a building block for how part of that community gets created so that, again, relationships are established. But that's one example, again, of a lesson that's not grounded in science that day, or it's not grounded in English that day. It's grounded in something to help students feel socially and emotionally connected to school so that the learning can take place.
Can I ask, just related to that time, do the students know that it's BAR? That
Yes.
they're being They do. So
Yeah,
they
so we talk about it
You
with
do,
them, and
okay.
we explain to them that we have an I-time lesson coming up in science on Tuesday, and we're gonna be talking about this and that. And so they may or may not be totally connecting that to BAR, but they understand that this is kind of going on. And we talk with them at the beginning of the year about, this process is taking place behind the scenes.
Okay.
I talk with parents about that too, actually, when they income as 9th graders. They'd say, this is a specialized program. It's not something you sign up for. This is just something, this is part of who we are. This is how we do business at Stillwater Area High School. And you should know this because all of this work is taking place behind the scenes while we have your children.
Got it.
Can I ask a quick question too?
You can-
In terms of the I-time lessons, is that curriculum coming from BAR, or are you
Yes.
guys providing it through other SEL?
Nope, that comes from BAR.
Okay, directly from that program?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Now we're on the right one. Joan is gonna, something is happening here.
Joan, if you can go back maybe one slide, there we go. We talked before about the idea with relationships that there's kind of 3 ways that we encourage that through BAR. One is teacher to teacher. What that means, again, is that's where those teacher-team meetings come into play. The way we organize BAR at the high school is we intentionally schedule students in teams, similar to like a middle school house concept, if you're familiar with that, where you have the same cohort of students that's in a house. What we do is we organize BAR teams around 3 core areas. So again, it's English, science, and social studies. So if I am the science teacher, and I have, let's say, 30 students in each class, and I teach 5 classes. We'll just go easy numbers sake. 30, we'll round down for you guys, right? But if I have 30 students times 5 sections, that means I have 150 students during the course of the day that I come into contact with. What we do is we schedule in such a way that there is a social studies teacher that has those same 150 students, and there's an English teacher that has those same 150 students. So that becomes the basis then of the BAR team. So when we come together for the purpose of discussing students, again, that becomes our common grounding point. And so the idea is that throughout the course of the semester and the course of the year, that team is going to actively discuss strengths of every single student. So 100% of the students that come into Stillwater Area High School are going to be discussed for who they are as whole children, as people, all of that kind of stuff. That's the primary message, actually, that I articulate to parents when parents come in for 9th grade orientation. We let them know, I know full well, the number one concern of parents for Stillwater Area High School, we're a large school, right? And that can be intimidating for a lot of kids coming in. We get that. But I talk with parents about the idea that there's advantages to a big school and advantages to a small school, right? The advantages to a small school might seem like, you've got this cocoon of protection and it's more likely that people are gonna know my child and less likely that they're gonna fall through the cracks. But I explain to parents that if big schools are smart about their work and intentional about how they go about their work, I believe in my core that big schools can replicate the advantages of small schools, but small schools simply cannot replicate the advantages of big schools, which is look at the rich variety of course offerings that we have. So if we're taking good care of your child, your student as a child, they're going to be able to take advantage of all of these other pieces. And this is how we do that. So yes, while some people may have this perception when they first come in of the big bad high school, the reality is that every child that walks in the door is going to get discussed by a team of teachers who knows that child and begins to start to figure out what the gifts are that child brings to the table so that can get shared with other teachers. And that's where that teacher-to-teacher piece really comes in. The student-to-student piece comes in through, like I said, some of the I-time pieces that get shared in class. There's collaborative exercises, there's relationship building that takes place. And then obviously the teacher-to-student piece comes in with the information that gets shared among teachers and also with a lot of the data that we track. Our teachers will give questionnaires to students where we ask students straight up, what kinds of things do you think you need support with? Do you think you need support with organizational skills? Do you need support with relationship building? Do you need support with loss or trauma that you're experiencing outside of school? All of those things get itemized out, and teachers are taking in that information to put them in a better position to assist students in their class. And again, all of those are intentional things that we do not by accident. And that, to go back to the very first slide on the history of BAR, that was the piece that is the principle I felt the best about, because BAR provides the formality by which I know that this is taking place. It provides the structure. These are all things that we said we wanted to do. BAR holds us accountable to making sure that all those things that we said we wanted to do for students is actually happening.
For elementary grade level teams, obviously it's more natural at elementary because you have the same group of people, but you also include like your social worker and instructional coach and principal in those meetings. But and then the teacher to student is how you're implementing whatever intervention as well that we have decided upon to try.
Well, and I kind of like this to be a conversation, so if board members have questions as things come up, just to naturally ask you.
Please.
Yeah.
But one thing I'm wondering is, you mentioned the 3, I know it's more natural in the elementary, but do we include teachers like specialists like gym, music? How do those teachers who, like, obviously math teachers weren't included, and I know it's probably for scheduling purposes, like where keeping all the kids together in cohorts, but do other teachers not included get included in the process and have access to the information?
Yes, at the elementary, they are invited to different components, and also when we're looking at who knows that student the best, they may offer insight because you might perform much differently in Phi Ed than you do in math. And so you need to figure out where those strengths lie. So yes, they invite groups together like that, yes. So that's a great question.
It happens for us too. So to your point about math is a core area, but there's more landing spots where students can start in math. We have some students that start in geometry in 9th grade, others that start in pre-calculus in 9th grade. And so that becomes more difficult to schedule. However, the math teachers have been invested in bar, and we have started to add math teachers to the bar teams so that they come. It's a little trickier for the math teachers because they might have to hop around between bar teams because their kids don't fall into such neatly organized buckets. And our elective teachers requires a little bit more work on our part, but especially as students start rising up potentially, say, to like a level 2 or a level 3, that's where all of a sudden we start to get message out to all of the teachers. And so yes, the elective teachers, because yeah, as you can imagine, different kids are taking different electives all over the place, so.
Well, and I can see if they're rising up, it's important to find those sparks in those elective classes,
Right.
even at the high school, so that makes sense.
Yeah, if you could shed some light around, so it seems like it started with kind of a top-down approach starting in high school, kind of creating that concrete structure that really ensures a holistic approach to student success. And then now more of with the elementary and being a kind of a first in the nation from an elementary school, doing kind of a bottom-up. Is that something where you're just trying to create a strong start, make sure we finish strong at the end, and then in the middle, obviously that seems like we're looking to incorporate that in the Stillwater Middle. Oakland was kind of a later on as well.
Correct.
Can you provide just some more background in terms of versus going straight down versus going here to here and then working back up?
I think when it started, and again, as Principal Bach described how it kind of came about, I think, Principal Gordy said, hey, I like this idea, I'm going to start it at the elementary. And so we had these pockets starting. I don't think district-wide we had a complete
Yeah.
lens on it.
There's been no district-level approach to this. This
Yeah.
has been building-centric, so
Okay.
high school, ninth graders coming in, Rob, Matt, hey, this looks like it'll be a great fit, we'll do it. Lake Elmo was having a lot of student behavior issues. And Stephen was working with his staff on strategies and was aware of bar. Okay, let's give it a shot. And she'll share with you some of the results here in a minute. So
Yeah,
what we're bringing this forward to you because, as Dawn alluded to, we've had some success behavior-wise, academic-wise within the elementaries. With bar, Rob had some really good, strong success early on with the program at the high school. And so as we're looking at, all right, priority-based budgeting, is this something that, we can continue to support and expand as we're moving forward? And I'm very interested in it, and but that's why we're giving you the overview tonight. But up until this point, there hasn't been a real district push. It's been different buildings and different grants that have become available.
we also realized, though, that the middle school, we were not going to have the system success that we needed without that middle level in place. And so that's why we made that a priority, so that all secondary schools had it, and then our goal now is to get the rest of the elementary schools. But we knew that was a gap that we identified, and why we made that a priority moving forward.
This just gives you an example of one of the many spreadsheets that we track, where, again, the conversations that we have, this becomes the basis of the notes. So this is an example of a spreadsheet that we keep during our Community Connect meetings, where we track student first name, student last name, and again, just where the classrooms that some of these pieces have come up in, who are the team members, what are the student strengths that have been discussed. The other pieces that you can't totally see on here, but the columns that go discuss the interventions that have been tried. So again, if you think about that kind of triangle model, the idea being tier 1 interventions are interventions that should be taking place in the classroom level. Teachers have conversation around, hey, have you tried this? Hey, here's an idea. Things that, again, in years past, historically, teachers might have said, you know what, I'm having a problem with this student, time to just refer this student to the counselor, or let's get a schedule change or something like that. Whereas our response now is, no, that's not the way that we handle those things. We need to figure out ways to address that so that the student stays in the classroom, but let's track all of those different things so that all of our teachers can go in there if there's ever an issue or a discussion around what was tried before with this particular student, or how did we get here? All of that is tracked.
And can I just ask, who owns the spreadsheet then, and who makes things happen on behalf of the student? Is that during those meetings, that the teachers get together and they all sort of figure out, we need to sort of escalate our efforts around this particular student? Is that kind of how that happens?
So there's different groups of people that come to different levels of the meetings. But what I would say first and foremost is our bar coordinator serves as the facilitator of these meetings and really is the owner of the document. So the document is shared out with teachers, but again, by the time you get up to level 2, all of the teachers are there at that big block meeting, and also our counseling staff is there at big block. By the time we get to Community Connect, we're involving teachers, we're involving counselors, and we're involving our social workers. That's part of why the social work has become so critically important, is because our social worker, of which we only have one in a school of 3,000 people, she's plugged into all of the students that might rise up to the level of level 3, in addition to the ones that she's meeting with individually to process things. Our school nurse is a part of that, because some of these students may have medical issues that wind up coming up. Our school resource officer is part of those meetings. So again, talk about someone who is not just there as a police officer, but someone who is invested in children and understanding all of the things that come into this child's life to make the kid successful. It's a huge team-wide approach.
Typically at the elementary, it's the school psych that facilitates and owns this, and again, it's shared out, but the beauty of it is it's facilitated by that person, perhaps a social worker, but then everyone owns it. And so the dynamics of the meeting is everybody's providing that input into the strategies, and then you list who's responsible for implementing that.
Okay, great, thank you.
So then with the data, can anyone access it, or do you have to have certain privileges? Like, I'm just thinking of that math teacher who might not be in that core. Can they look up their student even though they're not a part of the meeting, or would they have to go to the bar coordinator and say, I have a question on this student?
There's different levels of access. So like the math teachers, for example, are probably more plugged into, because there's team meeting notes too. And so for the team meeting, there's a running agenda for all of those team meetings, where in meeting number 1, we know for sure we're gonna discuss these 5 students, that we've kind of randomly selected, and in addition to whichever students, people need to bring up within the team. Next team meeting, we're gonna have another 5 students in addition to, again, whatever these other students are, and is there anybody from week 1 that we need to refer on to the big block meeting here next week? Those are primarily the notes that those other outside ancillary teachers would have access to.
So just a quick one. Are kids with disability included in all this?
Absolutely.
Yes.
All of our students are.
And then the case managers or special ed teachers would be involved as well. Okay, so again, BAR has helped us change the conversations about students to make it student-centered. Instead of it being, oh, what are we gonna do? How am I gonna make this work? I don't know what to do. Kind of that helpless feeling and not a solution, admiring the problem, versus very laser focused. So you have a set time, the timer goes off. This is your time to talk about this student. It's student and strength based, and we find solutions and goals for that student. So it really flips it around, because in education, we can spend a lot of time talking about all of the things that are barriers and not getting to the solutions. So this really helps us hone in and focus. So we have really worked hard to make BAR not another thing, as we have it becoming more prevalent in other schools, and making sure that we're aligning it with our work. So we have focused on our multi-tiered systems of support, And if you look at this, as you saw the triangle before, the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 support, that aligns with BAR. It's a framework for making sure that we have social, emotional, behavior, and academic outcomes. So they go together. They're evidence-based practices that we can implement to make students be successful. The understanding and belief that all students can learn and thrive. It's based on data. Family and community is super engaged in both processes. And then we have that check and balance and assessment of how we're doing. Is that intervention working? And then going up that triangle. So it works really nicely. And we have called our MTSS meetings Community Connect to have that same language as we move forward. And I think the next document shows that. So we have our district leadership teams that are talking about we have an elementary and a secondary one that are looking at MTSS processes. Then we have our building instructional leadership teams, our BILT teams that work on our 4 strategic directions, and our action cards are aligned to that work. And then we have within the school our teaming of small block and or PLC work that focuses on that tier 1. Big block focuses on that tier 2 intervention, and that community connect is that tier 3 really strategic intervention but you have to move through those systems. So that's how we've tried to align the two, and it's a very natural alignment. Yes.
So this isn't in all of our schools, so, but this is within our BAR schools, that structure exists, right?
Correct, but our structure, a couple things we have set up to make it be that way in all of our schools. So we all have PLCs, we don't all have small block. A lot of schools will have problem-solving teams, the tier 2 teams, and we all have a community connect so that they still have that same process. So once they become BAR, it will just be renaming those. We did that purposefully last year when we rolled out our MTSS process and connected it.
Got it, okay, thanks, that's good
Yeah.
clarification.
This gives you an example of one of the primary data points that we track. We track course credits, and so anytime a student is in danger of not getting a credit or doesn't get a credit, fails a course, we track that, and that's something that we want to stay on top of right away. This gives you a sense of kind of historically where we've been since we've implemented the BAR program. So going back to, again, 2017, semester 2, so spring of 2017, right before we started the BAR program. The blue line there, again, you can see each color represents a different grade. The blue line is 9th grade, and so that's maybe the one to focus on first. So prior to coming to 9th grade at Stillwater Area High School, our outgoing 8th graders, almost 15% of them had experienced a course failure of some kind prior to their entry into Stillwater Area High School. That had been part of their academic history. As they came into Stillwater High School in 2017-18, semester 1, where we started running BAR, we got that failure rate down under 10%. And you can see as semester 2 went on, and the following year and the following year, that line went all the way down to the point where if you look at 2019-20 semester 1, we reached a low point there of right around, I think we were under 2% of our students had failed a course in 9th grade. That actually got us some significant recognition by the BAR program. That's right around the time that we got invited to be an anchor school in Network for School Improvement, which was a larger piece kind of funded by the Gates Foundation, but is symbolic of the kind of success that we were experiencing with BAR. Two things kind of to note with that too is, again, the blue line is 9th grade, and the blue line is significantly below all of the other grades. That's the grade where we were implementing BAR, and so it makes sense. The other piece, though, that stands out to me is you can also see all of those other lines, even though they're above the blue line, they are trending in the correct direction. prior to COVID, which means that the influence of the BAR program had caught on. Even though we didn't have it structured necessarily in grade 11 and grade 12, this idea of going for every student and how we modeled that in 9th grade and started to try to carry that over into 10th grade, I believe was bleeding over throughout our school. The spike down there at the bottom, that's obviously when COVID hit, and we, as a district, undertook a huge shift in grading practice and did not hold students responsible for credit failures and things like that, which is why all of those things spiked down at 0. And then as they spiked back up, that's when we came out of COVID. And as you can see, since then, we're trending in the right direction, but we've kind of started and stopped and had a little bit mixed success with some of that. And while this chart here represents course credits, and so this speaks to academic achievement, we track similar things with regard to attendance, we track similar things with regard to discipline, and we see similar trends in that data, where again, from semester 1 to semester 2, or from year 1 to year 2, since we implemented the BAR program, those things are trending in the right direction for us, which is good. Once COVID hit, it kind of threw a monkey wrench into everything, and it's a little bit trickier and dicier to get a handle on that, and we're not where we'd like to be with all of that. It's still, we think it's trending in the direction that we'd like it to go, but it starts and stops, and we're still dealing, I think, with some of the fallout of that. But those are other examples of data that we track since this program's been brought on.
About how many measurements do you track that go into an analysis of how well BAR is doing?
A ton. I don't know how to quantify it. What I tell you is, but there's multiple measures though for each of those, right? So even for academic achievement, right? We don't base it all on course failures, and yet that's a pretty quick and easy one to extract out of PowerSchool. It's an easy one to share with teachers that becomes very visible for teachers. We can generate student lists very easily. So again, we're not just talking about, hey, we're really, really concerned about this student. We can also say, hey, you know what, this is translating into academic, danger zone here. We can also track that then across courses. So if we happen to see more student failures, say for example, in Algebra 2 versus something else, that provides a conversation then for our Algebra 2 cohort as they get together for their PLCs, which is a little bit different. But those are all examples of information that we share, that we track. So there's a number of different ways that we track academics. There's a number of different ways that we might track attendance. There's a number of different ways that we might track discipline. But all of that leads to the picture of what we're looking at.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around the gap that you talked about, the middle school gap.
Mm-hmm.
How does that translate when the kids actually get to 9th grade?
That's a great question. I'll tell you later off camera why I'm laughing. But I think, again, the important thing is, how do we ensure that we're educating whole child? I know that the middle schools are doing that because they have the middle school house concept, right? And I'm not an expert on middle school house concept, but I know that there are similar patterns there by which teachers have common groups of students and cohorts of students that they help to support. The big thing, I think, was that that wasn't happening intentionally in high school. It doesn't happen at every high school. We wanted to make sure that that wasn't happening by accident. We, historically, as everyone here knows, Stillwater's pretty proud of its academic record, and rightfully so. My concern was, we need to be proud of that by virtue of our intentional efforts and not just by accident, that kids happen to come to us ready to learn. I actually shared with my staff, we've talked a number of times about John Hattie, and I think I've referenced it for this group once or twice before. He's kind of the guru in measuring all of the things that have an impact on student achievement. The number one thing is, he's run meta-analyses on all of these things. The number one thing is teacher efficacy. Do teachers believe in what they are doing, and that will manifest itself in student success? And that's one of the things that BAR hits on. We know that we are doing this intentionally. We believe that our kids are going to be successful as a direct result of what we are doing.
What kind of, just trying to think about different things that data you can collect around that social emotional component of this. What attendance, what else?
Discipline.
Nurses' visits, Sometimes kids avoid, especially at the elementary. I have a stomach ache, I need to see the nurse. So they look at nurses' visits, they look at discipline data. We have different screeners that we have implemented. The SABRS tool at the elementary is an SEL screener that shows where our students are SEL wise, and we just met with secondary, and we're piloting that same tool at the secondary level, and we talked about how to align it with our bar data and how to incorporate it. So those are a few pieces. Attendance.
Some of the other pieces, Chris, is we'll administer questionnaires to students. Maybe it's during I-time, maybe it's a separate questionnaire, but we will ask them all kinds of stuff. We'll ask them about organization, we ask them about study skills, we ask them about relationships, how easily they're able to make friends around school, or do they struggle with that? Illness, as Don talked about, stress, anxiety, depression, self-esteem, family, loss, abuse, chemical use, self-harm, thoughts of self-harm. So all of those things are things that we're taking information in on and data that we track.
Thanks.
This is a little bit about Lake Elmo. This is looking at the past 3 years and the amount of students that they discussed and really honed in on creating SMART goals, whether they were academic goals or social emotional learning goals. And you can see as the data goes that they're talking about fewer students that are in those high risk categories. And they're having success with the amount of people meeting their goals. And some of those are still in progress, obviously, for this year. But you can see that data is really improving as those systems are in place. And, again, students that you're talking about in the lower elementary, our goal is to catch them as early as possible and intervene early so that they're not showing up as a student to be discussed and continue to have a SMART goal. So that's really good information and data. And again, those conversations are very focused on how they're doing on those goals.
And so when you say students discussed, because you've said all students are being discussed, these are the ones that are maybe elevated.
Exactly.
To that next year. Okay.
Yep.
So I can see where you have like this huge buildup of data. And to Dr. Funk and your point of having a system, you're probably losing a lot of that data if you're not having this as a
in a
practice
middle school. And that's
then,
why.
And then when they come into ninth grade, even though there are systems, it's not the same system.
Right. So hopefully systematically we can have this information and you would hope that you wouldn't continue to see the same students. Somewhere along the line, we wouldn't be doing our job if they're in first grade, third grade, fifth, seventh, ninth,
But you could look back.
But you
maybe
can.
They're out and then maybe
Exactly.
something happens and you can reach out.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. That's why that spreadsheet is really valuable, and we
Yes.
keep those from year to year.
And to just follow up on that, it's not as though these students are not being discussed and subjects of conversations at the middle school and at the elementary. It's not that so much, it's just that you're focusing the conversation in a different way through BAR. And so if you can have that system in place in the elementary and the middle school, then it just makes your efforts more efficient and effective once they get to the high school. Is that, am I interpreting that correctly?
That's exactly correct.
That's the
Yes. So you can see a little bit about, so here we have attendance data that's gone up as a result with BAR, and then you can see our test scores. So you can see math dipped a little bit last year, but there was a significant increase in reading, which didn't happen in many of the elementary schools, and an increase in science. And then again, that behavior data, if you look at in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, it decreased significantly. And I know Stephen talked about how many referrals he had prior to BAR, lots, and how that has diminished immensely too. So not just in-school and out-of-school suspensions, which isn't our goal ever, but also that you're not having those behaviors in the first place. And Afton, Lakeland has very similar data. If you look at their test scores, you can see a big increase in math. And then they had a slight increase in reading. And again, both of these schools have BAR in place, and we saw increases. So we needed to look at that and say, well, we want this for everyone. They did have a dip in science. But they also track their green room visits. These are breaks, and they're tracking the reactive and unscheduled, not your scheduled breaks that you build in as an intervention for a student. These are, there's a dysregulation and we need to provide an opportunity for the student to be elsewhere. And you can see that has significantly declined since BAR implementation as well. So it does make a difference.
From my perspective too, I think it's great to look at the MCA. There's so much more that goes into MCA.
Oh,
where
yes.
This is the platform, but my mind is thinking that there's curriculum, there's PB. I mean, there's a lot. But I like the framework and the structure and the dedication of the time and BAR.
And I think we were just going to briefly go over this. I think I talked about this already, just aligning it to that MTSS, and then Gina really focused on connecting second steps responsive classroom to the U-time piece. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our two new schools, Oakland Middle and Brookview. So when you start with BAR, you get 3 full days of professional development for your staff. You also have a coach that is assigned to your building that provides ongoing support. And then you are part of a cohort that you have that access to, like with principals and other schools that are implementing BAR. But just in a short time, we've seen that positive professional development. I've had the opportunity to see the PD at Oakland and Brookview, and then in Afton, they just finished their 3-year training up. So it's been really received well. Again, those asset-based conversations, that at Oakland, they have an equity committee, and they're really looking at, again, the needs of all students. Everyone is really focused on that. And students are having better, more positive relationships with one another that is reducing conflict. And so they're all seeing a start and beginning of those reductions in behavior referrals. I-time and U-time lessons are implemented at both of those buildings. So just even in the short time, both principals have seen some real growth in how staff is talking about students and those relationships that they're developing. District-wide, just some highlights. We've seen that Stillwater Area High School saw the decline in 9th grade failures from 14% to 6.5 in that first year of implementation. And then, Principal Bach talked about that in depth. Again, from 2019 to 2023, MCA scores at Lake Elmo in both math and reading increased by 8 percentile points. And while overall MCA scores dipped last year, both Lake Elmo and Afton saw an increase in proficiency, as you saw. Who is supporting BAR? So we have that team of staff working together to support implementation. Like I said, there is still a coordinator at the elementary. Again, typically a school psych has been in charge of that. At the middle school, we did, so Oakland is in process, Brookview is in process, Stillwater Middle is just beginning. So next year, they will both have a BAR coordinator at each of their buildings, similar to how the high school is, just so we can get this off and running properly. And then we have a coordinator at the high school. It is a 3-year commitment. When you sign up for BAR, it's a 3-year implementation with that PD, the coaching, those pieces that I talked about. It is expensive. It's $80,000 annually per year, and that includes those pieces that we talked about, including that U time and I time lessons, so teachers don't have to create those on their own. We have used private grants. Both Stillwater Area High School, Lake Elmo, and Afton were funded through private grants. We received, MDE had a grant process last year where they gave out X number of grants to elementary and secondary schools, and we were the recipient of 2 of those, which was really exciting. We wrote a non-exclusionary discipline grant this past year, and that's how we funded Stillwater Middle for 2 years. The 2, Oakland and Brookview, are fully funded. Stillwater Middle is funded for 2 full years. We just wrote another grant to hopefully, it's a big grant. Danielle McGill worked really hard and a team to put that together. And that one is, we're hoping to get 3 more schools. So fingers crossed, we keep looking for ways and creative solutions to fund it, because it would be a big hit to our general budget. But we feel like it's important to get as all of our schools to be completely a BAR school, so that they all can see the benefits and the results that we need. And we have that system going through all of our schools, K through 12. At this point, we'd have to look at early childhood later, but that's our goal. So again, it aligns with our pony plan, and that's the hope, that we can continue adding without taking a huge hit to the budget, but also make it sustainable. And we are fortunate, Stillwater High School and Lake Elmo were just named, what did they call you? Exemplar?
There's so much terminology.
I know.
Yeah.
And they just got rewarded for kind of being the lead at those different levels. And so they've added these Thrive components as $7,000 more each year to get a little bit of extra support. They waived that for those 2 schools because they utilize the principals in the team so much as models for other schools to follow. And we're going to the BAR conference. We have a large group going the week of April 23rd, and many of our teams are presenting. So they use Stillwater as an exemplar in lots of places, and it's exciting, and I think, we're seeing positive student results and success, and that's the main goal.
Yes.
Couple questions. Where does it come from? Where does BAR come from? Is this just an entity out there that you subscribe to it?
It's actually based in Minnesota. The person that started BAR was a school counselor and realized that we needed to strategically look at what was happening with students, and then kind of piloted, did a lot of research, and provided evidence-based pieces. And then, so it started in Minnesota, but it has moved, but the company is, the main company is based out of Minnesota.
Okay, and then additionally, seeing some good results, how do we cause and affect that? How do we know that the good things that are happening are because of BAR? And I imagine at the elementary school, we're doing well at Lake Elmo, but are the other schools the control group now? Are they not doing as well?
Well, like I said, Lake Elmo and Afton showed results in growth in their test scores, which is not the only thing to look at, but also results in behavior data decreasing. So we think that BAR and the other systems and things that we have in place is one of the things. It's hard to say, oh, BAR's the only magic answer, but we think layered with our MTSS approach and the data, like we have our school-wide meetings that we're focusing in on data. All of these things layered together, we're seeing results. But again, I think flipping that script and talking about students from an asset-based and solution-based has really helped refine the work.
How does this look, if you're a family, if you're a parent? Are they involved in conversations? Do they get summaries maybe of any kind of like, this is something we're seeing, or we met as a team? I don't know. I mean, I know our families really want to be engaged and involved, and we want to encourage, we're always encouraging that from a school perspective. How does that work?
One of the most common tier 1 interventions that we talk about is parent communication. And it's shocking when you think how really not all that long ago, parent communication was not a super common practice for a lot of teachers. For whatever reason, educators, I don't want to go too far out the deep end, but a lot of times they're scared maybe to pick up the phone and call mom and dad, right? No, we're partners in this whole thing, right? And so this is a huge part of that. And so if we're seeing something in class, talk with mom and dad, share that. This is, hi, I'm Mr. Bach, I'm your kid's science teacher. I just want you to know, I've noticed some really great things about what little Robbie does in class. I've noticed this, that, and the other thing, but I'm really struggling with this piece over here. I want to clue you in. Is there anything that's going on at home that might help with that or contribute to that? Or do you have ways at home that historically have worked and helped in school? Those conversations are the big ones. Another piece that we've talked about at the high school is actually starting up a parent questionnaire prior to students coming in. So again, when I talk about, BAR is one of the things that I talk about at 9th grade orientation, because again, it's part of how we do business, and parents should understand that. And so as a part of that, when you talk to parents about, hey, we want to get to know your children so that we can build upon the strengths that they bring to the table, because that will reduce all of the risk factors that come into play over high school over here. Why don't you tell us about some of these strengths too? And so that's the piece that I've talked with our BAR coordinator about, revamping the questionnaire that goes out so that we're getting more and more of that communication from parents. What a great way to start out your high school experience, right? No one knows their kids better than parents.
Yep.
Share some of that stuff with us so that we've got it on day one. Let's hit the ground running.
And also not just getting information about what is working or what they're seeing, but then once we do implement some interventions, making them aware of that and the progress their student is making is really an important piece, so that they see all of, the benefits in what is occurring.
And I like how you phrase that phone call, because I think so often parents will, no one, you think you get a call from the teacher and you're like, oh no. But to be able to get a phone call that says, hey, so-and-so
Focusing on the strengths.
Yeah, focusing on the strengths and the positive is so refreshing to hear that that's happening.
First, thank you for this presentation. I had jotted down a lot of questions of clarification as I was going through the deck, and you have really thoroughly fleshed out and made this story vivid for us by giving us all the examples that you did throughout. So I appreciate that. I mean, I've heard lots of information about BAR along the way, but I think this may have been the most thorough presentation I've heard on this subject, so thank you. I want to go back to the costs again. So it says $80,000 annually per building.
For 3 years.
For 3 years?
Yes.
Okay, so, as time goes on, then what does the cost become? Because, I mean, if you have like a BAR coordinator in every building.
That's not part of the cost.
That's not part
That's
of the
additional-
cost?
that's not-
That
That's
would be
an
separate.
additional cost.
Okay,
Yep.
and that would be also different from instructional coaches?
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The other thing, BAR just changed this because they went more from nonprofit to having to be self-sustaining a little bit. So they are having this, it's called Thrive, that you would pay $7,000. Do you need to do that? We were probably not planning to do that because we already have the systems in place to implement. That's another way for them to gain money. We can make those decisions along the way. Like we said, if we wait them out enough, they might, provide those to us free like they did for 2 of the schools. So we'll continue to see that, but we have that 3 years will take full advantage of all the things that are available to us and make sure that those systems are strong so that we can sustain it on our own without additional funding later. We can choose to or not, depending
So
on.
the sustaining costs, once you're through that implementation period per building, is mostly just in the salary of the coordinator, or?
Yes, part of
But
that.
you would
and-
get some curriculum from them still?
Well, no, you have it, but again, there wasn't a cost after 3 years. They just changed that. So and again, they have different levels of support that they can provide based on what you want to pay. I think it goes from 7 to 10,000, if I'm remembering
As Don
correctly.
said too, though, there's some pretty extensive professional development
Yeah.
that gets done as a result of that. So during teacher workshop week, one of our days typically is dedicated to bar exclusively. So we have a total of probably about 60 teachers almost that sit in on that training. And the first year that we went through it, we trained our whole entire staff. So even, say, if I'm a US government teacher, teaching primarily 12th grade students, where we don't have bar structured in 12th grade yet, they were even getting professional development on some of this stuff. And our bar coordinators, I've been blessed to have two of the best. Katie Papungatoa was our first bar coordinator. We put her on special assignment literally to do that job when we brought it in. And she did amazing things with it. And then when she moved in, such good thing, she parlayed that into an assistant principal position. And then when we had to replace that position, we stole Tara Peterson from Oakland Middle School. And she was drawn to it just by the power of the program. But those people, as they come in then, are setting up professional development for all of our teachers to coordinate all of those meetings. And one of the things that Katie and Tara had done was they started extracting data where we don't have any data in 11th grade and 12th grade around common, like, scheduling. They started tracking students. So again, if there were students that were still rising to the level of concern for us, they were starting to put together mock student schedules to say, you know what, these students have these 2 or 3 teachers in common. Let's form a little bar team with these teachers. But again, that's not things that we can extract out easily or schedule on the front end, because schedules start to become so stratified by 11th grade and 12th grade. But that's part of what they were doing to involve all of our staff. So it's important that all of our staff has that professional development on the front end.
At the elementary and the middle schools, all staff is being trained. All of them are going through the training.
You go, Andrew?
Perfect. So other than not having this be district-wide at this point, based on both your pretty significant experience with BAR, I mean, what am I missing here? What's the limitations, or what concerns do you have? We say, I wish BAR did this better, or
Time,
time.
I was gonna
I
say.
mean,
Time is a-
people's time.
yes.
Yep, time and
capacity.
cost.
Staff,
Those-
staff members' time, okay, we're asking them to do CAT teams, we're asking them to do bar, we're asking them to do big block, small block, okay? It's stress on the system, okay? So it really, when we're talking about priorities for the district, what are our priorities? And if bar is successful, okay, bar is a priority for us, but what else gives? Because this does take time that, as we're looking at, we've talked a lot about students and student assets tonight, okay? We haven't talked a lot about the curricular side of things, and, yep, we've had some success with literacy, but guess what? The READ Act is coming in, and we've got letters training coming, which is mandated for all of our elementary folks. So time is the biggest challenge,
Do we have a plan for that?
yes. No,
More
there's no
time.
plan after.
When you,
There's a lot of moving
with
parts.
the data the slide that talked about the meeting structure where you saw small block and PLC kind of together, again, we've tried to take out some of these meetings and, be more strategic in how we're doing things. But it's still, it is a barrier, it is more time.
Dr. Proveni?
Thank you. So, truthfully, I'm gonna concur with Bev here with respect to the presentation. Wonderful presentation. Over the last few years, one of the biggest struggles we've had in the district is intervention. We always talk about the test scores, The excuses in the past has always been curriculum, right? That you're bringing points here, there's family, there is, student to student, teacher to teacher, teacher to student. All of those, initially, when we said, look, this is beyond just curriculum. There's more to this than just curriculum, and this is exactly what's happening now. And for reading, letters was one of the intervention for our third graders, and like you rightly said, results have been seen. And now we're having this intervention for our elementary school students and of course high school students. So I'm really excited about, what you all are doing. I wanted to ask, my last question here is, the challenge with our students of color, especially in the testing, and we're seeing improvements, right? Increases in test scores. Are you tracking our students of colors? Are they also a part of these increases? I know Lake Elmo has done a tremendous job with Amigos Unidos. In general, how are you seeing this intervention in relation to some of the improvements with our students of color?
I think there's still room to grow, but the beauty of it is that we are looking at that demographic data. When we were talking today, as we look at attendance and we look at behavior data and we look at academic data, are we serving all students? Those are the questions that we need to continue to ask. And when we find that subgroup that we're not hitting the mark, what are we doing differently? And we're starting to have more of those conversations as we have these systems in place to look at it. It's a work in progress, I will say, but it's becoming more in the forefront. We actually have been meeting with a family engagement group at the high school, and they had similar questions. Some of the families and the people that are participating are representing our underserved populations. And they asked, how do I know that my student has a relationship with someone at the high school? And then we talked about BAR. We also talked about some of our behavior processes, but we realized we need to be more transparent in talking to our parents about proactively what we are doing to create those strong relationships and how we are striving to serve all, and gather their input when we're not hitting the mark. So we're hearing what could help us as we move forward, and that partnership and collaboration is super important. And so those are the conversations we're starting to engage in. I'm really excited to see where it continues to go, because we absolutely need to do better in those groups
One example,
for all students.
One example, at the high school a couple of years ago, before we had Power School and a little bit more automated ways of making sure that messages that went home to families got home in their native language in a way that they could understand. We were struggling in particular, say, with our Latinx families and Spanish-speaking families to, we're sending out messaging, this and that, and yet there's a communication gap that's there. We started paying just at a building level for our messages to get translated into Spanish so that we could get them sent out. That initiative started out of BAR and out of a BAR conversation. And so that's one example, again, of how let's take a look at all of our students of color. The NSI that I mentioned too is specifically, the reason it's funded by Bill and Melinda Gates is because it's designed to address inequities for students of color. What are we going to do to reduce that achievement gap? And that's the reason that we got invited into that. And so there are several examples of that, but that's one example of something that came literally out of BAR that raised our awareness to say we need to do something a little bit differently as a school.
We have significant areas of improvement.
Yeah,
We do.
for sure.
Sorry. I guess I just kind of have a comment for you guys. A lot of the questions that I had were answered from questions my other directors were asking and from your presentation. You guys are very thorough, so thank you for that. I guess one thing that I was picking up on, particularly when you guys talked about the questionnaires, that you go real in depth into the nitty-gritty for asking students directly about some really, really hard topics. And I guess it just got me thinking about how important that is, that the adults are initiating that conversation. And for the kids who are really struggling with hard things like loss, that they might not have the words or the right place to bring that up and how impactful that is on their education, and how we really need to take that hard issue head on and see them for what they're going through. And I guess I didn't realize that that was such an intentional piece of this program, and I really appreciate that, because it really is looking at the whole child, and seeing how we can support them in the best way possible, so that we can have the hard conversations, work through it, give them the supports that we might not have even realized they needed, and really get them to a better place academically. And they want to do well. Their parents want them to do well. They want to do well. Their teachers want them to do well. And I really see a lot of great things that this program is allowing us to do, and that streamlining structure. So I really appreciate all the work that's going into this, and I hope we can continue to expand it. I guess my only lingering question is, are we going to continue working through grants
No.
in expansion? Or?
No.
Okay.
And so, you know, if it's a priority for the district, then we will figure out how to do it. We are not gonna be dependent upon grants moving forward.
Okay.
Okay, so, no.
I have just a small question, and then I'll go to you, Neil. So much when we have, in community engagement, like a year and a half ago, the board put together a calendar, and so we've all been very intentional about going out into different activities. And one theme I'm hearing when I go to these activities for students is that club, that extracurricular is so important to feel that connection in both the middle school and the senior school, high school specifically. But does this track clubs, activities, things that kids might be connected to, or maybe flag people that aren't in anything? You know,
We
that
do
don't-
look.
You
Mhm.
do look at that. Okay.
They do look at that, especially at the middle and high school too. When I've observed those meetings, it's like, what are they in? Or they're a soccer player, or they're not in anything, but they really have this interest in this. And so that asset is trying to figure out that avenue that can help strengthen
Yeah.
those skills.
That's great. I can see where time would be a challenge here, resources like bodies, people, because all of this is very time intensive and relational. And as we all know, that all takes time. I mean, when I hear one social worker for the high school, I'm sure we all went, you know, I mean, that's a lot for that one person to be doing, and how effective can they be? So I can see some challenges, and if it is a priority, like Dr. Funk suggested, you know, where is there duplication of systems? Because, you know, we hear a lot, and I'm not the educational expert, but I'm looking at, you know, QComp, AVID, Responsive Classroom, MTSS, SABRE. I mean, I can just count all these things, and I'm sure that's.
All the
what-
acronyms.
Yeah, well, and I'm just
Yeah.
thinking, is there overlap? Is there some
Yes.
consolidation, some efficiencies? What can we pull and consolidate, which isn't obviously the job of the board here, but I can see the challenges taking this to the next logical step, so good luck. Let us know
That's
how we
why-
can support you, but,
Yeah.
but it's exciting work, and thank you for the presentation too.
Well, and that next logical step, or just, you know, as time goes on, once you get it to a systemic level, once it just becomes a routine in our operating system, hopefully, that gets easier. Hopefully, we've built those lines of communication to families at an early stage in their process through our school, so that by the time they get to high school, maybe we're pushing kids higher and not just trying to make sure we pull the kids up that need the help. You know, I could see where, you know, if we're real intentional about it, it's not a struggle as much as time goes on. So, yeah, it's awesome.
And even if we had it in the middle school, I could see where you would have middle school teachers meeting with ninth grade teams. And being able to
Right,
have
so
that
those
efficiency
transitional
would be
pieces.
So nice. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean, this has been great.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you for the
Appreciate
opportunity.
it.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And if Principal Gordy were here, you guys would still be on like slide number 4.
Yeah,
No, we wouldn't.
Yes.
Guaranteed.
Well, the passion is definitely there from the people implementing, so
Well,
that's
and
a good
always
thing.
keep us posted. We love hearing this stuff and how we
Yeah.
can support your work, so.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you, thank you.
All right. With that, we're moving on to strategic direction C. which is utilizing systems and aligning resources in an efficient manner to support learning. And with that, we're on to policy. So welcome, Paul. We have a second reading of several policies. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you and good evening. So all the policies we had that are listed here and are on the agenda, we did the first reading of each of those policies at the last board meeting on March 19th. Since that time, there hasn't been any major changes to any of the policies following the first reading. And there wasn't any input provided as far as I received, and I assume from the board members as well. So we could, I'll just maybe read through we won't spend a ton of time unless there's questions about each one, but we'll just kind of read through the list and remind you kind of like where that policy sits. So policy 203.2, it's order of regular school board meeting. That's a new policy for the district. The policy 305, policy implementation, replaces, it's an update to a current policy with current and updated information. Policy 306, Administrator Code of Ethics, again, it's an update of our existing policy based on a few, again, little updates that were done by MSBA and reviewed by the committee, the policy committee. Policy 413, Harassment and Violence, is a new policy for the district, and that is a mandatory policy for us. Policy 416, Drug, Alcohol, and Cannabis Testing, that replaces and updates our current policy, mainly with new language around the cannabis and the legal requirements around that. Policy 417, Chemical Use and Abuse, that's a new policy for us, also a mandatory policy. It does replace our old SR 1.7, which was revoked, I think, at the last meeting. Policy 526, Hazing Prohibition, that's also a new policy for us and also a mandatory policy. It does replace the old SR 1.10 that, again, the board revoked at the last meeting. And then finally, policy 528, Student, Parental, Family, and Marital Status Non-Discrimination. That is a new policy as well for us, and it aligns some legal requirements that's in statute, so it will cover us under those components. So I think that covers the first reading. And
The second reading.
Yep,
second
this is
reading,
the second.
exactly. Thank you so much. Second reading is kind of complete, so.
Were there any other comments from board directors? And we haven't, again, the committee and Paul have not heard, and pretty straightforward when we review these. With that, I know we are moving these policies around, and so my back is to the audience. So if there's anyone in the room who would like to speak to any of the policies that we've had, this would be the time where you could come up and just in accordance with our public comment, can make your comments to the board if you have concerns or support for any of the policies. Okay. Seeing no public comment, we're going to move on to taking action with these policies tonight. Is there a motion to approve this series of policies that are posted on the screen here? Dr. Porbenny with the first, I think I saw your hand for the second. Great. All those in favor of approving policy 203.2, 305, 306, 413, 416, 417, 526, and 528, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Opposed? Policies pass. And then we are moving on now to strategic direction D, develop strong partnerships with communities we serve. And we're going to have a bond update. And for that, we've got Mark. Welcome.
Good evening.
You have guests?
We do. We have two guests. I'd like to welcome Val Peterson, Paul Apikowski here with Wold Architects here to give you a bond update. Just a quick reminder, in the end of February, we kind of gave an update around Anderson and Lake Elmo, the design teams that were kind of in the middle of that process. We have finished the first kind of phase. There's a couple different phases of it. So now that we're done kind of the first phase of design, we want to give you an update of where we are and then kind of talk about what that next phase is going to be and then what to expect after an update with that next phase. So the first one is we had our core planning groups met 7 times, pretty much from winter break to spring break, kind of every other week. Had about 20 to 25 people for each building that had representation from many different groups: classroom teachers, special education teachers, specialist teachers, meaning FIED, music, media, intervention. We had parents, we had community members, and district staff and district personnel as well as part of those. Each of those meetings, we kind of started out with guiding principles and guiding criteria. Then we toured 4 different buildings that have been recently either remodeled or new buildings in the metro area. And then came back and had a lot of good conversation about what we want our buildings to look like and what they want to be. And then we'd have a conversation, we'll take that information back, design what we talked about, come back the next meeting, say, okay, here's what we talked about, what do we like, what do we want to change, take the information from that, and have a lot of iterations to kind of where we are here today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Paul and Val to kind of give you an update of where we are with both Lake Elmo and Anderson.
So Mr. Drummerhausen went over a lot of this. One of the pivotal things that our core groups did was go on tours where we saw some new elementary schools. That really helped develop a common language and a vision. It also allowed a lot of the staff and teachers to talk to the teachers and staff at these buildings we toured to see how it works for them, what do they like, what have they seen different about being in their new environment from their former environment. So that created a lot of, I think, camaraderie. Another observation that both Paul and I have about working with both these groups is even though Anderson and Lake Elmo are very 2 different schools and very 2 different communities and sizes of schools, they actually have a very similar vision of looking forward. And their core groups were facilitated independently, but it was really kind of fun to see how aligned the 2 groups really are of what the next building should be. And on the next slide, what we did, as Mr. Drummerhausen identified, is we really worked around a lot of words in these core guiding principles and these values. So this is just a few of them. These are really some of the ones that were very similar between the 2 sites.
Yeah, we should point out that each site developed that. So the first few meetings, we worked on some different exercises to develop these.
Yep, and these are just kind of the ones that are very common between the 2. And both of them really wanted their new design in their building to be really reflective of the community, as well as being inviting and welcoming of the community activities. So that really hit home with them, and it's always a conversation at every one of our meetings is how is it reflecting our community and how are we making sure it's inviting to our families and our greater community. The next big point, I think, was collaboration, and collaboration between not only the students, but also the teachers and the students, and then the teachers with the teachers. And how can our environment change? Because the way we instruct and deliver curriculum is much different than the years that those buildings, Anderson and Lake Elmo, were constructed. So how should the new environment reflect that, and also be looking forward in the next 50 years so that we can also not only provide a flexible building for today, but accommodate the next 50 years of instruction. And then I think one unique thing too about, specific to Lake Elmo, was they find a lot of benefit of incorporating their immersion program with their same grade level. So in that building, immersion won't be necessarily segregated from the general education. It is per grade level, intermixing the immersion and the grade level together into a community or a pod that you'll see later on in the plans.
All right, so we'll start out with Bayport. One of the things we like to do, especially with the core group that's interested in identifying with their community, is we do some research on the history. So there's a lot of great stuff about Bayport, its logging history. There's some amazing pictures like that log jam on the right side there. And obviously there's a real rich culture of sort of centering life around the river there. Next slide. And that exists today too. There's lots of great fun festivals they have there. One of my favorites is that little rubber ducky race on the left side there. So again, a lot of focus on that river and how it brings life to the community. So one of the things we're focusing on for our design is the idea of the watershed. So we're taking that and looking at this tremendous area. It's 7,700 square miles of area that feeds that, and using that as some inspiration for the design of the project in terms of materials and the look and feel of the building. So we'll go to the next slide. And here you can see some images that we've pulled. These images start to help us understand how we might have color, materials, and textures in the building work, as well as shape some of the spaces inside. So a lot of rich things to pull from there. And then we're working on some ideas around the idea of weathering. So that watershed, basically water starts at the top of it, erodes things as it goes down, and it changes the forms. So we'll be, again, drawing from these to help inspire what we do inside the building.
And really, this is our building plan. So this is very early. This is, again, this core group is really responsible for identifying the overall adjacencies in the organization of the building. So here is where we are at. We have our main entry that is supported by our administration with our secure entry, which is a model throughout your district, specifically at the elementary levels. And then kind of that right side of the building from the main entry and to the right, that's really the community side too. So if there are, call it after-school events or weekend events at the building, there would be access to the gymnasium and the cafeteria and possibly even the music space as a community classroom or a space. And all of that would be kind of also where the students go and part of the plan of exiting the building throughout the end of the day for either parent pickup or a bus pickup. To the left side of the building, this building will, in the darker orange, this building will support centralized CIP for special education. So that is kind of a centralized suite that is really much like the other green spaces, which is our grade level pods. That is really surrounded around something that has been coined the Learning Commons, which I guess is a media center, is the most closest thing to liken it to. So all of these things are really kind of supported and centralized off of that media center. That was something, again, that tours really helped identify, is how do these pods get organized and what should they all come around. And the Anderson group in particular for the new Bayport Elementary found having a centralized learning commons was really meaningful to them. This will be a two-story building. So on the next slide, we have our upper grade levels. So the two-story building is really over the classroom parts.
Then if we jump over to Lake Elmo, here you can see we've included a preliminary site plan, and we still have a lot of work to do with regulatory agencies for how everything is going to connect. But our initial plan is to try to have a couple of driveways off of the two major arteries there. We do have some requirements to keep them away from the intersection, so they're located farther away. And then you can see how the building fits on the plan, and we're doing trying to comply with all of the requirements of spacing and distancing from property lines with what we're doing. And you can see that kind of the green space is up to the northwest there. The main parking will be out front, and also you can see we're trying to get as much possible space for stacking as we can. Maximizing that, as that's become a new trend in schools, having that. And then it's totally separate and area for buses to go, so that those things don't mix with the parents at all. The same thing with Lake Elmo. We've done some research into the community there, and there's some fascinating things that have gone on up there. One is that it was a thriving vacation destination for a while for the Twin Cities. One really interesting part about it is that after about 10 years, the train tracks went by you, and it wasn't so popular anymore. And they found a new life as a dairy, actually. They did a lot of processing of milk that went back into the cities to be sold. So a lot of rich history and a little bit more of a historical context there. And centered again around lakes, but in this case, we're really thinking more of the prairie and some of the current community's commitment to nature that's up there. Go to the next slide. We're starting to draw some ideas from the prairie, the shapes of the prairie, the colors that the prairie have as a way to help inspire some of the internal look and feel of the building. Next slide. One of the interesting things about both of these is that they're formed by the glaciers really are the origin point of that, so we're kind of drawing of that as a common ground between the buildings. And then in this case, we're thinking a lot about the experience of being in the prairie and trails and kids being in the prairie. So you'll see when we get into the next phase and come back with some more images of what the building is really going to look like inside that will capture some of this idea.
And this building is scale-wise larger. It will hold more students than the Bayport Elementary School. So this building's planned around 1,100 students, including pre-K. So you'll kind of see that in this plan here. The colors are the same as what we had at Bayport. So if we look at the main entry there on the south of the plan, you would enter the building. And again, we have kind of that community accessible area for after hours to the left on this plan, which includes the music room, our cafeteria, and our gymnasium. The gymnasium at this building, again, will be larger because it does have more students. Kind of in the central area of the building, our dark orange is also another special education centralized program for the medically complex. So it will hold our elementary special education as well as the specialized programming for that. To the right, we have, again, all of our learning communities, our learning pods that are circulated around that centralized learning commons, formerly known as the Media Center. These classroom pods are organized in generally groups of 7 to 8 classrooms. Again, 3 classrooms out of every pod is actually intended to be the growth of the Spanish immersion program. And again, they wanted their Spanish immersion with their general education classrooms together. You'll start to notice a little bit of a dark greener pod, especially in that first grade and second grade. So some of the envision there is perhaps this is a space that's designed a little bit more uniquely than the other classrooms, really for hands-on activity and work that you may be doing as part of any type of curriculum, even part of your spelling or your learning might actually have some kind of activity that might actually have hands-on in a little bit different environment to utilize in that space.
Val, talk about the staff rooms quickly.
Yep. So a lot of what is going on in these pods is that teachers aren't necessarily assigned a classroom per se. It has the opportunity of really learning together and being able as a team, much as your earlier presentation about how we are a team of teachers that are not focused on these 30 students, but this whole pod of students. This has that opportunity that these teachers aren't teaching a ratio of 1 to 28 students. They're teaching a group of 7 times, I can't do the math fast enough, 220 students, depending on the grade level, working together to make all of that successful. So what that does is give an area for the staff to collaborate in so that their rooms can also be available and rotating through it. So the staff have a space that not only share some amenities and some of their curriculum activities, but also a space that they can talk to each other, coordinate over student success and challenges, and also have some private and confidential phone calls.
I think we should talk a little bit about the building. Both buildings really are designed for flexibility. I think in a number of the buildings that we went and looked at with the group, we showed them a concept called the learning studio. So rather than, it's just a way to reframe the idea of what a classroom is. And the learning studio would represent the whole pod together. And so it's a way for a team to think about that whole area being their classroom together. And then it provides them other resources to be able to take advantage of. So again, if one of those spaces is a little bit more lab-like, it can be used for more hands-on, and then teachers can rotate into that as necessary to do those kinds of activities. The staff area is another version of that too. If they can have a professional office to be based in, they don't necessarily have to keep all of their stuff in a classroom, and would allow more flexibility for that classroom to be a shared activity. And then one of the interesting things about the critical mass of this building is we're able to do those classroom in kind of blocks of 3 plus 1 if necessary. And each one of those 3 classrooms is worked to work kind of like a mini studio together too. Each one has a unique sort of connection out to the flex area and to the classroom adjacent to it. So you haven't decided how you're going to program it yet, and we don't know if teachers
Correct.
will have their own room or not. That's a future decision, but it will provide the flexibility to do that in a different way.
Which is all part of that, some of that versatility that was the goal of the core group.
And those same things exist in the Bayport Elementary too. We just didn't highlight it as much detail.
This building, all the upstairs is very similar to the downstairs in terms of additional grade level classrooms. Upstairs here, there is a couple more specialists. One, there's more specialists just because there's more students. Also, some of the specialists located up here just have more interactions with the upper grade levels, such as some of our instrumental and music courses up here.
So looking at next steps, so this is kind of the first phase is that core planning group is done. Now we move into the user group meetings. So we started last week at Anderson, spent 2 days. We had about 15 different 1-hour meetings with different groups. So we had intervention as a group, special education, ML, each of the classrooms, teachers came together to talk about how they use the pods and how they want to collaborate and how that looks within that. The music staff, ed staff, media, et cetera. So we had Anderson last week. This week, we're gonna meet on tomorrow and Thursday with the Lake Elmo group. Then we'll take those conversations and those meetings, that we talk about, cabinetry, where we want sinks, what about outlets, how do we want rooms to function, all those sorts of things, the nitty gritty of each of those rooms. We'll take that information back, put that down on paper and say, okay, here's what we talked about in April. We'll come back to another round here at the beginning of May and have a week with Anderson, a week with Lake Elmo, and say, keep this, change this, have a couple iterations of that. Then once that's done, we can take that and then start to create some construction documents. And at that time, we'll come back to the board here this summer and say, okay, our user groups are done. Now come back, here's what our buildings look like, and then we'll create that to go out for bidding and look to award bids kind of late fall, early winter, and then look at breaking ground next spring is kind of our process that we're moving on right now. So that's a kind of a high level of both of the buildings, and all three of us here are open up to any questions or comments that you may have.
Yes, Director Petrie.
I know that both of these buildings are two-story buildings. How many elevators are you going to have in these buildings?
We would anticipate just one. That's a detail that obviously we can work out with
Just one.
facilities maintenance, but.
Okay.
Can you
Yes.
go back to the first level of either, like right here? So you got your main entry, but as you're walking in, right to your left there, you got receiving and kitchen and all that. Aesthetically, would that be kind of hidden, or how would that be dealt with?
Yeah, there's ways that we've done for screening around that too, and really kind of the entry into that loading area is from like Plan West too. So it's a little bit less visible from the road that would be directly south of that. But definitely a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot of, intentional architecture around that corner too.
Okay.
To make sure it's feels just as inviting as kind of some of the things that happen over on the right when it is classrooms.
All right.
I think this is a good example of how the group's input matters. There would be different ways to organize it. One of the things that was very important for them is to have the cafeteria have a view of the playground and easy access to the playground. And by putting the loaded dock in the front, we were able to get the playground outside the cafeteria and then also not have the gym classes cross over the driveways as they go out to the green space.
And some of that is looking at, lunch recess, what does flow look like? And part of this design is we to take the flow of, okay, beginning of the day, a carpool student, a bus student, how do they look and get to Adventure Club or their classroom? How does lunch recess look? How do people move to specialists? At the end of the day, how do they go? All those different flows of how a building works was taken into account of putting these adjacencies together.
Just for the sake of the board and for maybe those in the community who are interested, could you maybe explain some of the safety features in these designs, or has that been
You can go ahead.
discussed?
Well, it's very commonly believed that one of the best practices now is to have a secure entry, which you have in all of your buildings now. So that's the primary thing, is know who's in the building. So the front door will open up into a vestibule. During school hours, the secondary doors will be locked and everybody's forced into the office to be screened. So that's a primary thing. One other thing that people don't think about as much, because we all go to the headlines version of safety, which we'll talk about, but schools face security and safety problems every day. Usually they're around behaviors and theft and fights and things like that. And so the core group really did tour a lot of buildings, looked at a lot of buildings, and it's going to be designed with a sense of community in mind. So within the building, there'll be a lot of shared resources. There'll be a lot of ability to see others and what's going on. And that in itself helps everyday security a lot. When it comes to the shooter event that nobody really wants to have to talk about, there's a lot of things being built into the building. Certain places within the building are hardened so that you can't get through them. They're not necessarily bulletproof, but it allows you to get away from the threat, and the threat is trapped outside there until authorities arrive. And what we typically do is do that at several locations within the building. So there's layered security within there, and there's an ability to lock down and hide behind those things. Or in buildings like this, where a pod is a security zone, you also have the ability to escape, because there's generally a second exit out of there. So we'll be thinking about all of those things as we go forward.
Notice there's doors to every pod.
Mhm.
And then there's stairwells outside.
Perfect. Yes.
Mark, I know that it was important to get started on these two schools. Do we have any sort of a timeline on the work on Oakland and the high school?
Yep, so we just kicked off Oakland end of March. So we had their first first meeting. Last Tuesday, we did the tours. We visited 3 different sites, Hudson Middle School, White Bear, South Campus, which is now their junior and senior building, but it's going to be the middle school next year, and then Valley Middle School in Apple Valley. And so we kind of had their design principals have that conversation, did some tours, and now we're going to meet next week to kind of recap the tours and start this process here with them. And then the high school, looking at the remodel of the entrance, it's a smaller project, so we'll probably kick that off early next year. Just the scope of that isn't as big as what these 3 projects are.
Okay, thank you.
Just in relation to our first presentation on bar, it's knowing that that's something that we might be bringing to every school. Is there something in these designs, like, just thinking, I saw green room still there at Anderson. I can't find it on Lake Elmo, but it's probably there.
So without getting too much into the weeds, each one of the pods, there's individual classrooms and there's connections to each of the classrooms. Some have, a glass wall in between so they can open it up to have a larger space to have 2 classrooms in one. Some have like a barn door connection back and forth. We did purposely designed spaces, kind of small, medium, and large group spaces, because each kid learns a little bit differently. Also within that, there are small group rooms and medium group rooms for our support staff to come to them. So in our current buildings, if student receives speech services or ML services or intervention, they go away from their classroom to that. There's spaces here now where our staff comes to the kids. So the kids stay in the pod area, and our intervention staff, our special education staff come to them, and there's spaces designated in there for those services to be provided for them. So as they have conversations about what supports that kids need, there's spaces provided to give those supports to those kids in each one of their pods that they'll be living in.
Okay, so those social emotional spaces for self-regulation, those
Yeah.
things will all
There's
be.
those as well.
Okay.
Yeah, another thing that both groups were very interested in. So there is, there's sort of a suite, it's labeled SPED on there, but it's an area that services can be delivered within there. That has its own calming room within it. But there's actually another calming room. It's almost really just like a little mini conference room
Yeah.
that is meant to be used for anybody in the learning studio that might want to use that, so.
And will there be outdoor learning spaces at either of these? Have you guys discussed that at all? I know that came up.
Bayport will have one.
Lake Elmo will have one?
Bayport will have
Bayport
one.
will have one.
We would anticipate both of them having
Some
some outside spaces, yeah.
I
Yeah.
suppose with their themes, I guess I just thought it would be kind of a natural.
Sure.
Great.
On Lake Elmo, you mentioned a lot about the prairie and whatnot. Did the lake itself come up at all? I didn't hear, it is Lake Elmo. Did that play in?
Sure. Yes, we talked about it quite a bit, and that's what the resort was formed around originally.
Oh, the resort, okay.
For the theme, we're thinking about making it more about prairie and flowers and the forms and the life that comes with that.
Okay.
The connection
And,
to the park reserve
correct.
and the-
Yeah.
Yep,
All right.
the neighboring property.
The
Yep.
Sunfish Lake, the Wildflower Prairie Conservative, some of those
Okay.
things that are on there.
And I've always said this, but are we getting any kind of I know it's really hard in elementary to get like student voice at all a part of these designs, but do you do anything with students and understanding what they might like, or?
We have not done that yet. We certainly can make it part of this user group process or later on. One thing that we found successful, we do that more at the middle and high school level.
Okay. Which would make sense.
Yeah. At elementary, one thing that has been successful is when you do furniture, is to get some input based on
Oh,
furniture. It seems to be something
Yeah,
that's more
just something.
approachable for kids to take part in.
And in these groups within the community, is there, I know like in Lake Elmo specifically, it's a very diverse school community. Is that kind of cultural diversity, is that reflected in design and are those voices, I would hope that in the community groups, we're getting, perspectives of all demographics in our buildings, so, just kind of a comment. Great, this is a wonderful update, really exciting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, that concludes this portion of the meeting. We're gonna go into closed session right now. So the next item on the agenda is a closed session pursuant to Minnesota Statute 13D.03B. The governing body of a public employer may, by a majority vote in a public meeting, decide to hold a closed meeting to consider strategy for labor negotiations, including negotiation strategies or developments or discussion and review of labor negotiation proposals conducted pursuant to sections 179A.01 to 179A.25. I will go ahead and make the motion. Can I get a second?
One second.
Great. All those in favor of moving to closed session, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye.